For those who did not know John, he was a loving and caring member of our community, having grown up in Bethesda and having lived in Silver Spring for more than 20 years. On June 28th, 2018, John's life tragically ended when he was murdered along with 4 colleagues in the tragic shooting at the Annapolis Gazette. Unfortunately, we know this is not an unusual circumstance. There have been over 300 mass shootings already this year in the United States. And while they have tripled in frequency since 2011, they are still a tiny fraction of all gun-related homicides, which are already approaching 10,000 nationwide in 2021. So we're here today to acknowledge that we have plenty of work ahead to reduce mass shootings and to get guns off our streets. We're fortunate to be joined by John's sister-in-law, Jan McNamara, and we're also joined today by Melissa Ladd, the chapter lead for Maryland Moms Demand Action. I want to acknowledge and thank all the volunteers at Moms Demand Action and the many other organizations who work day in and day out to protect our communities from gun violence. Their work and the work of so many families and activists against the scourge of gun violence is so important, as is the work of all of our first responders. We know that there are so many victims of gun violence out there, far more than we could acknowledge today, but we hope that John's name may be a reminder that we'll never stop fighting to reduce and hopefully end this unconscionable epidemic that has plagued too many communities for far too long. Thank you all for joining us today and for your continued efforts to save lives. Let me turn it to Council Vice President Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's an honor to be joined by Ms. McNamara, and thank you, Melissa, for your tireless advocacy and that of so many organizations across this country who have stood up and tried to demand action against gun violence. Just yesterday afternoon and evening, I had the opportunity to participate in a ride along with our fire and rescue squad. And earlier in the day, they had responded to a gentleman who had tried to take his own life right here in Montgomery County with a gun. And that is just an example, yesterday alone, of gun violence that is inflicting our community right here in Montgomery County. Gun violence disproportionately impacts communities of color, and it is something that we as a nation must stand up and fight against. We cannot wait for the federal government to act. Local jurisdictions must continue to be able to move forward. And just recently, my colleagues joined me in introducing legislation and unanimously passing legislation to ban ghost guns here in Montgomery County. Just yet the latest version of this tool of destruction that is plaguing our country. So it's an honor to stand here today with Jan and her family, remembering John, but also the thousands of victims every year. We must ensure that we say their names, that we talk about their stories to make this real. We can't be numb to this issue. We must fight back. Thank you so much, Mr. Council President. I yield back to you. This is an important day to recognize.
Absolutely. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you all so much. I believe I've lost video, but I hope you can still hear me.
We can.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, President Hucker, Vice President Albornoz, County Executive Elrich, and all of the members of the Montgomery County Council. I know that Councilmember Jawando is also a gun violence survivor, and I greatly appreciate the work he's done in this area. I'm grateful that Melissa Ladd, lead for the Maryland chapter of Moms Demand Action, one of the country's largest gun violence prevention groups, is also here. And I'm proud to be among their 6 million members. John's widow, my sister-in-law, Andrea Shambly, can't be here today as she's attending the trial of the perpetrator of the Capitol Gazette shooting. He has pled guilty, but not criminally responsible. 3 years ago today, John's face was on the front page of the Washington Post. Reports of the attack on the Capitol Gazette was international news. My brother was traveling in Vietnam and texted me to make sure that John was okay. Later that morning, my next door neighbor, as I was saying, my neighbor had actually read about the Gazette attack. She'd even seen John's picture, but it had never dawned on her that she was connected to one of the victims, because we all read headlines about gun violence every day, be it about a mass shooting, domestic violence, road rage, a suicide, or some other kind of tragedy. And we think it can't happen to us. But my family is a reminder that gun violence can happen to anyone. And as the proclamation states, it does happen to over 100 Americans every single day. Most of these deaths, especially those that take place in communities of color, don't make the news because only the most shocking fatalities become media stories. And too often, a gun-related death or injury simply isn't that shocking, not in today's world. But it should be. And a violent death is always shocking to a family, whether your loved one died in a crowd or entirely alone. And as Andrea says, not all gun violence survivors have bullet holes. Any statistic you see doesn't include her. It doesn't include my own daughters, who are now 14 and 11 years old and have been doing armed attacker drills as long as they can remember. But when my daughters do these drills, they can't pretend that this is a case of the adults being overly protective. They know that they can become targets, and their friends know it too. So I'm profoundly grateful to the Council for your commitment to reduce gun violence. With your leadership and the use of evidence-based solutions, you can prevent other families from experiencing what mine has. Thank you for standing with the victims and survivors of gun violence throughout the county.
Thank you so much, Jan, and thank you for joining us today. Melissa?
Thank you so much. We are so grateful for the continued support and work of the Montgomery County Council, the county executive. We look forward to working with you guys in the future. And, we really appreciate this gun violence proclamation to bring awareness to this crucial issue that we all need to be paying attention to, honoring survivors and continuing in our work going forward.
Terrific. So thank you. Now, Council Vice President and I will alternate reading the proclamation. This is the proclamation of the Montgomery County Council. Whereas every day, more than 100 Americans are killed by gun violence, in addition to more than 230 people who are shot and wounded, bringing the yearly gun homicide average to a staggering 13,000. And
whereas jurisdictions across the nation, including in Montgomery County, are working to end the senseless violence with evidence-based solutions, such as ensuring that public safety is one of our highest priorities. And
whereas gun violence extends its deadly reach to all corners of our community. For example, John McNamara, who grew up in Bethesda and lived in Silver Spring for more than 20 years, was killed in the Capitol Gazette mass shooting on June 28, 2018. While Mr. McNamara's murder received national attention, countless Montgomery County residents lose loved ones to gun violence in ways that do not make headlines. And
whereas gun violence prevention is more important than ever as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to exacerbate gun violence after more than a year of increased gun sales, the rising number of calls to suicide and domestic violence hotlines, and an increase in city gun violence. And
whereas we renew our commitment to reduce gun violence and pledge to do all that we can to keep firearms out of the wrong hands and encourage responsible gun ownership to help keep our children safe. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland declares June 2021 as National Gun Violence Awareness Month, and be it further resolved that the County Council remembers John McNamara and others whose lives were senselessly cut short due to gun violence, presented on the 29th day of June in the year 2021, signed by Council Vice President Albornoz and myself. Thank you all so much